It's a great field to get into because nobody knows what it is. There's no clear definition of what is and what is not a social entrepreneur. There are very few universities yet that offer professional degrees in social entrepreneurship. There's no master's program yet that I'm aware of. There's no industry code of ethics. So for those of you who are ethically challenged, this is a great field to get involved in. There's no professional union or guild to keep you out. No dues, no secret handshake. You can jump right in. And the real message of all that is there are no second-class citizens in the fight for economic justice. You can get started today. You don't need to ask for permission. You can do it without jeopardizing your reputation, your career. You don't need to jeopardize your sex life. Whatever it is that you're doing, you can still be a social entrepreneur. You just need to get started. Because social change work is not about you being perfect. It's about you making a difference. So the deal is that we already know a few things about this social change game. We know that if you want to go about the business of overcoming 10,000 years of racial, gender, economic, environmental exploitation, in the end, we know that the poor and the impoverished have to have the ability to speak up and speak out and speak for themselves. Social entrepreneurship best practices starts with empowerment and changing the status quo. It means political and economic opportunity for that woman in the Bolivian Andes. It means taking sides on the never-ending journey for justice. I want to say that again. The core of social entrepreneurship, most of the tools that we use, tools that we borrow from the legal profession, from the business community, from sociologists, from across the intellectual spectrums, all the silos that we organize the intellectual disciplines of a great university like this one. All those tools, that's what social entrepreneurs are using. Healthcare, water, hydraulic engineering, name it. But we're picking whose side we're using them for. We're taking sides on the journey for justice. So the deal is you can't really go about this unless you're willing to call out a few entrenched interests and challenge the powerful. If you're going to be a social entrepreneur, prepare yourself to make a few enemies. And I'd even go a step further and say if you envision your social career, social entrepreneurship career, as following an arc that's enemy-free, you may be choosing the wrong profession. Change starts at the micro level. It starts with small, mini steps of courage. It starts with truth-telling. So when I was growing up in the 60s, I was an anti-war activist, what we in the United States called the war in Vietnam, and what the people in Vietnam called the American War. And when the notion started to seep into the consciousness that this was a war that was both illegal and immoral and plain stupid, and was killing an awful lot of people needlessly around a harebrained theory of geopolitical change, we didn't start with mass rallies. We didn't start electing progressive politicians. We didn't start at some macro scale. We started with small teach-ins in living rooms, in church basements, in labor union halls. And as we gathered strength and learned our message and tested our will, we took those teach-ins into the public sphere. Small community meetings, leafleting in front of supermarkets, writing letters to the editors. Little steps that built a movement. I think the same is true today. Most of the social enterprises that I know, led by the very best social entrepreneurs, are at the teach-in phase. We're small enterprises, we're big risk takers, we don't know where it'll lead, but we're out there swinging for the fences. So one of my heroes is John Kenneth Galbraith, the economist, and a Canadian, I should mention, since I'm here at a Canadian university. And he used to say, and I love this line, he said, there's something personally satisfying about being disagreeable by advancing the truth. Somewhere, someone is waiting to hear your disagreeable truth. Each one of you has the capacity to see something new in the world. You each have your own authentic story and your own lens. And one of you, maybe all of you, are going to teach the rest of us something new and give us some new way to see a problem, or maybe even identify a problem that we had not seen before. So I mentioned that I grew up in San Francisco in the 60s, and I went to a private boys' school, very elite and so forth, hard to get in. And we dated the girls at the, go figure, we dated the girls at the private elite schools around San Francisco. And we would take them to cotillion balls and debutante balls, and it was all a very rare atmosphere to be in. And I learned a lesson early on that I think is useful to share with you. It's the lesson we all basically already know, and that's that money buys access. Money determined who was at the dance and who wasn't. Exclusive turned out to mean excluding others. So look, that money is power is not a newsflash. Ask any poor person. Money's the power to buy medicine for your sick uncle. Money's the power to feed your kids. Money's the power to get yourself retooled for with a better education. It's self-esteem in your community. It's empowerment in your household so you can talk about safe sex with your partner. Every poor person knows that money is power. And for that reason, and that reason alone, of which there are many other good reasons, it means that social entrepreneurs need to be in the economic justice business. We're not in the business of figuring out ways to puff up pension fund returns. We're not in the business of figuring out ways to make poor women more profitable chattel. That's somebody else's business. Jonathan Swift, the Irish poet, observed once, he said, "A wise man should have money in his head, not in his heart." Ideology and economic theory are not the honest work of social entrepreneurs. Someone who's drowning doesn't care or ask whether the life preserver was paid for by a taxpayer or a shareholder or a charitable donation. A drowning person doesn't care or ask whether the lifeguard is a public or private sector worker. Leave that debate to someone else. What social entrepreneurship needs is profitable nonprofits, pioneering for-profits, principled and compassionate capitalists, government policy wonks with wide peripheral vision, politicians who get that the world's borders matter less than the people who live within them. If you want a role model for social change, Bolivian women are the pragmatic pluralists we should all emulate. A Bolivian mother worries every day about money, all day long. It's a constant concern. And the same should be true for social entrepreneurs. Cash flow management and balanced budgets are the backbone of every social enterprise and every social movement. Period, full stop. In the book, The Art of the Start, Guy Kawasaki has a great line, which I enjoy. He says, "You can't change the world if you're dead, and if you're out of money, you're dead." So if you can't or won't raise money as a social change agent, as a social entrepreneur, you can be the very best person in the world and earn the respect of your community, but you're not a social entrepreneur. Social entrepreneur is about taking this tool that we call money, assets, wealth, cash flow, et cetera, and putting it in the service of a more decent world. So a Bolivian mother also doesn't get to go to conferences like this one and to economic development meetings to talk about good management or innovative ideas. But her everyday life reminds us that the work is tough and you don't get to quit. She doesn't get to quit, and neither can we. Giving up is a form of arrogance, and it's a luxury of the well-off. So my view is that social entrepreneurs need to talk a little bit more often and a lot more loudly about the learned attributes of good personhood: courage, conviction, compassion, character. I used to think that the only kind of change that was worth doing was large systemic change. I now think that a single mother or father raising a child, say a woman in Bolivia, is having an impact as powerful as any impact investor or NGO. In fact, in the 60s, to keep pulling back to my early days as a social change agent, the muckraking journalist, a guy named I.F. Stone, said, in one of his newsletters, which was a progenitor of what we now call blogging, he said that if you expect to see the final results of your work, then you may not be asking a big enough question. So when we honor change agents at all levels of impact, from the very small to the very large, we're affirming that economic development is human development. And human development work is the biggest challenge of all. So what about going about this? So we all want to do good. But wanting to do good is one thing, and actually doing good is another. As Arthur Schlesinger said, the moral advantage of being the architect of many losing causes is highly overrated. So if you want to up the success quotient for your social enterprise, here's the tip. Here's the inside word. Your ability to be a good listener, matters a whole lot more than a great elevator pitch, your brilliant business plan, or your clever idea. Listenership is the predicate for networking, for mobilizing a political movement, for community organizing, for attracting financial backers. It's the essential social entrepreneurship skill. Listenership makes it possible to act on your client needs and hear your stakeholders' concerns. Listenership reverse engineers the paternalistic impulse to export first world solutions into third world communities. When we did the Cafe Impact video series, I was stunned that when we went back and listened to the, hundreds of hours of video, raw video footage that we had on tape, I was stunned about the consistent messaging across all the voices. We interviewed people from all walks of life, different ethnicities. I think 60% of the voices were women. All of them pursuing different sectors of social change. The consistent message: get real world experience, witness injustice firsthand, be a good listener. Listening is the industrial spine of social change. So speaking of spine, my recreational reading is books about espionage, spying, and so forth. And during World War II, one of the great spy masters was a man named Bill Donovan. He's considered the architect of modern spycraft. And he bequeathed to social entrepreneurs, although he didn't realize it at the time, we're sort of ripping him off, but he bequeathed a really useful thought, kind of a call to action for change agents. He said, we can be high-minded without being soft-headed. We can be high-minded without being soft-headed. For social entrepreneurs, for all of us in this room, that means being high-minded in our mission, but hard-headed in the pursuit of it. It means listening to and hearing the world the way it truly is, not as we fictionalize it or romanticize it or ideologically impose our views on it. So in my case, as an American, I like to remind my fellow Americans that 95% of the world is not American. You would be surprised how many Americans don't seem to have this idea in their head. So stay with me on this. I want to conduct a little bit of a thought experiment. You don't need to leave your seats, and nobody in the front rows will be doused with water or otherwise tricked or brought up here to perform a magic act. But the thought experiment is taking the entire world's population, 7 billion people, and shrinking it down into one village of 100 people. Now this, by the way, I should tell you, I stole from a children's book by the same name. The author is David Smith. So in this village of 100 people, 8 of us speak English, and 20 of us speak Chinese. 7 of us talk to our neighbors in Hindi, 6 of us speak Spanish, 5 of us speak Russian, 4 speak Arabic, another 4 speak Bengali, 3 of us speak Portuguese, and 2 each of us speak French, German, and Japanese. That's the world as it is, not as we sometimes see it in our little narrow neighborhoods. So in that same village, 37 of us have a job. The rest of us don't. 18 of us can't read or write, and only 1 of us has gone to college and gotten a college degree. The 20 richest villagers in our village consume 45% of all the meat and fish. And those same 20 villagers use 59% of all the village's energy. 20 women in our village, our sisters, our mothers, our daughters, have been assaulted or raped. Half of our neighbors, don't have a sanitary toilet. And 5 people in our village, 5 people, control 50% of the village's total resources in wealth and assets. In our village, people who live at the base of the economic pyramid are plagued with a number of market imperfections. For example, let me give you a few. In a functioning market, as we all know, willing buyers and willing sellers determine prices. But where the poor live, scarcity and monopoly mean shoddy products and predatory pricing. In a functioning market, consumer protection and financial transparency are protected and enforced by a court of law. But where the poor live, property rights depend on social norms and brute force. In a functioning market, investment capital moves to its highest and best use. But where the poor live, capital is rare and it's expensive. In a functioning market, a distinction is made between public and private goods, between street cleaners and vacuum cleaners. But where the poor live, private investment is sometimes the only investment. And as a result, life's basic necessities come at a high price in terms of time and money and lost opportunity costs. In a functioning market, survival of the economic fittest means some businesses succeed and some fail. But where the poor live, the only ethical policy is not creative destruction, it's creative opportunity. I can't give you a formal definition of economic justice any more than I can give you a comprehensive definition for freedom of speech or human dignity or community values or any of the other intangibles that we all hold dear. I can tell you it makes me angry that 1 out of 7 people in the world are chronically hungry. They're starving to death in a global concentration camp of hunger and deprivation. 300 million of those people are children. They don't get the minimum daily calories they need to live. That means to me that we're far away from anywhere close to my idea of an economically just world. And I'm happy as a social entrepreneur to get us on the road and take a few steps toward something that resolves that problem while I'm working on what's the perfect definition for social entrepreneurship. Chronic hunger is a genocide against the poor. It's a war crime without a war. Social justice work is an existential statement about your values. Our values, our shared global citizenship. In the 60s, there was a pacifist minister who, when he became agitated about the war in Vietnam, took up every night holding a vigil in front of the White House. And he held a candle in the dark. And he was all by himself. He was very lonely, and it was very cold, and he was there night after night. And finally, one night, a kind of hard-nosed journalist was walking by and turned to him and said, you know, I get your principles, I get you're a good person and so forth, but you know, this is ridiculous. You're not going to change your government by holding a candle every night in front of the White House. No one's even paying attention. And the minister looked at him and said, you don't get it. He said, I'm not trying to change my government. I'm trying to make sure my government doesn't change me. Even when the results are discouraging, and there are a lot of discouraging and disappointing days, standing up for social and economic justice reminds us who we are. It affirms our commitment to live an honorable life in a sometimes dishonorable world. In my case, it makes good on a promise I made to myself to bequeath my son a legacy that is worthy of him. One of the most poignant moments of my life was seeing my son graduate, get his bachelor's degree at Columbia University. And it was important to me for a lot of reasons, but the first and maybe most rooted was that my own father didn't graduate from high school. He was a straight-A student, but got pulled out of high school as a young man because it was the Great Depression and he had to go make a living. And that sense of inferiority from lack of education hung over him his entire lifetime. He was very successful, but it ate at him. It corroded his sense of self-worth. And in my own case, because it was so much more fun and zesty and fulfilling to work in the streets rather than go to class when I was a college student, I don't have exactly a spectacular grade point average. And I never went on to earn a higher academic career, something that I some days have had to regret. So to see my son graduate from a great university with quite good grades and have a promising life ahead of him was very meaningful to me. And so we were all assembled there, the quad at Columbia University, and the chaplain gave the invocation. And of course, she acknowledged the incredible accomplishments of the students, and you know, the bachelors and the masters and the PhDs, and acknowledged the role of the parents, and you know, it was pretty standard presentation. And she reminded the students that with the benefit of this great education, that they were going to go out and have great careers and great professions. But with that education came a responsibility to participate in the public sphere in some way. And a hush came over the audience as people realized the importance of what she was saying. And she ended her talk with these words. She said, "Be a maker of peace, a voice of reason, a steward of mercy, be the hands and feet of justice." Thank you. Okay, here's the first one. Gravity did not win the Academy Awards. Oh, no, okay, measuring social thoughts, concerns. Okay, so the first question is about measuring social impact. It's a tough question. Because if you say you're against measurement of social impact, you sound like a Luddite. And I have learned on university campuses, which are committed to advancement of the store of knowledge of Western civilization, this is not a good thing to do. So let me step back from that precipice and say this. There are stages of development for a social enterprise. There are two reasons to measure social impact. One is for the leadership, the management team, the board of directors, whomever, to evaluate alternative paths at decision points in the growth of the organization. And in the beginning days, when it's very small and you don't have a lot of resources, you may have to wing it. And as you get bigger, you want to sophisticate your decision making. Certainly, outside social impact measurements make sense. The second reason to do it is to satisfy an outside stakeholder. Basically, you're developing impact measurements because you want bragging rights for how much you're accomplishing. And for those of you who are in that bucket, the only sensible thing to do, in my view, is to go talk to the stakeholders you're trying to impress, ask them what they want to learn, what will satisfy them, get them to pay for it, and go measure it. That's what I think. In large measure, I'm a skeptic of the field of evaluation because I am fearful that even if we can accomplish all that we want, even if we can work out all the methodological hurdles, even if we can start replicating studies from country to country, and all of a sudden we're learning so much and it's all wonderful, it's going to turn out for most organizations to be the kabuki theater that's analogous to the outside audit, where friendly firms are hired to audit organizations who then get a management letter with some suggestions on what management should do to better manage their books. They clean things up a little bit. They get a clean audit. It goes on the website. No one reads it. I don't think it's a driver for most decision makers that I've met in the social change space. Martin, to go back to the theme of this colloquium, Martin Luther King did not stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and say, I have an evaluation report. What is your biggest failure? You mean besides my talk today? So I presume you're asking in the social sector, right? You're not talking about my career as a basketball star? Well, let me talk about a recent big failure, because it's new and it's still hanging on my shoulders. So starting Cafe Impact, Cafe Impact has not been a success. For those of you who are interested in it, we've produced 30 really high quality, very insightful, inspiring, but also practical videos by everyday garden variety successful social entrepreneurs. So not rock star social entrepreneurs, not Hollywood people, not people who for whatever reason have come into great wealth, but just folks like all of us in this room who go out there and do the hard work every single day. But these people have been at it a while, so they're not beginners. And they were very candid with us on camera, very open, and they shared their views. And the content, I think, is of high value. But our goal was to reach millions and millions of people, principally millennial generation members, but people in general with the content. And we didn't accomplish that. And so we spent a significant amount of money and we didn't reach our goal. And I call that a failure, and it feels like a failure to me. The mistake that was made was we thought that the business model was about producing good content, because a number of advisors and consultants and lots of people said to us something analogous to, well, that the internet is blossoming and there's a need for good content. If you produce good content, the world will beat a path to your door or your video camera or something. And this turns out to be, at least in our case, not true. Or maybe we didn't produce good content. I'll let you judge that. But most people seem to tell me that it's decent. But it turns out the business model has to be around media distribution. And that's a world that the founder, me, didn't know anything about. And too late into the enterprise, this discovery hit me. and it was too late to retool and bring in people who did know about it, and then we ran out of money. I think the learning lesson there is, of course, you never know what you don't know. So I'm not beating myself up about it, but I do wish in hindsight that I had had the perspicacity and the wisdom to pick somebody else to run the project. Someone who knew the vocabulary of media channels, who spoke Hollywoodese, who could go talk to people in the media outlets of New York and Hollywood and everywhere else about how to go about marketing and distributing the material. And we didn't do that, and it's, you know, we're done. So that feels like a failure to me. Let me say one other thing about failure because I want to dispel a myth. There are two kinds of failures that you hear about at these kinds of meetings. One failure is the person who gets up here who's very successful and says, oh, I failed, but then I picked myself up, and it was a setback on the path to success. There are other failures that don't show up at these events, which are just failures. And people are crushed by them, or they go bankrupt, or they go away. Social enterprise work is tough work. You need resiliency, you need tenacity, you need dedication, you need to constantly be putting your ego aside so you can listen carefully to your market or your clientele or your shareholders or your donors or whatever. And that's an everyday 24/7 responsibility if you're a social entrepreneur. And frankly, if I had done that earlier in the Cafe Impact process, it would still be alive today. But I was so blinded by and having so much fun being on camera that I stopped listening. I thought, oh, this is great. Of course this is going to work. And so we had I was an idiot. All right. Are these organized in some logical way here? Can I use your talk to help me think about strategic? So this question I'm just going to read. What can I use from your talk to help me think about and teach about global societal transformation to create a sustainable habitat healing political economy? You were listening to the speech. That's terrific. If you were listening, you probably shouldn't be using any of it, but you're welcome to use all of it. I'm in the social change business, not the copyright business. Okay? How to influence people that social entrepreneurship is a win-win situation. It's not a win-win situation. Social entrepreneurship is not a win-win situation. There are winners and losers if you're good at winners and losers if you're good at what you're doing. You are upsetting markets, you're upsetting power relationships, you're changing the status quo. So you need to, let me say it again, go make some enemies. If you don't know who your enemies are, you don't know who your friends are. You're either on the side of a constituency or you're on the side of an ideal, a cause, some better vision for the world. And by definition, that means there are people who are content, comfortable, self-satisfied, and entrenched, who like things the way they are today. So I don't think that this is necessarily a win-win. Sure, take a stab at it. I don't mean to suggest that you should be combative. The style you go about things can be diplomatic, considerate, be good listening, look for common grounds. People don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. That's all true, of course. But in the end, don't delude yourself that you can always be, that you can seduce people into the notion that let me re-say this. At some point, everyone will need to make some sacrifices. Economic sacrifices, lifestyle sacrifices, consumption sacrifices, some sort of sacrifice if we want to have the kind of world that we all want to live in. So we might as well accept it now that we're in the social sacrifice entrepreneurship business. All right. Do I know of examples of, I just want to acknowledge this person's question. They're asking me if I know examples of where social entrepreneurship has successfully conquered the substance addiction problem, and the answer is no, I don't. Sorry. Let's see. What are the barriers to more success, bureaucratic hurdles to social entrepreneurship, and how can they be overcome? So there's a longer question, but let me just quickly say, and generically, I don't have a perfect answer for this, but the first thing I would suggest to most of the social entrepreneurs I know, especially those of you who are on the front end of your enterprises, which I assume would be more typical of most of you here on a university campus, because you've come back to tool up, to go out and scale up. Don't create your own bureaucracy. Don't spend too much time in the closet designing solutions to problems you don't have yet. So my favorite example is in the category of marshaling resources, whether nonprofit charitable resources or for-profit investment resources. The classic is everybody gets on the team gets together and they start making lists of foundations and people of high net worth that they've read about in the newspaper, and you know, the list gets longer and all that. That is not a useful way to spend time. Much more useful to go out and talk to your immediate friends and neighbors about who they know and who they'll introduce you to. If you're interested in starting a project that's empowering young women to become journalists, much better to go out and start talking to some young women who have an interest in writing, and start talking to some journalists about what the possibilities are and what are going to be the hurdles in that space. It's like the social entrepreneurs said on the Cafe Impact series. Go out and get firsthand experience. It'll tell you really fast, one, whether the work is doable and whether you like it, but also what the immediate hurdles are. Don't create your own bureaucracy. You know, don't write the employee handbook if you don't have employees. Okay. Boy, some of these are getting to be long conversations. I'm going for the short ones with the easy to read handwriting. The less well-known social entrepreneurship challenges, your predictions on the top 3 social entrepreneurship businesses in the next 3 to 5 years. That's a great question. A little terrifying because I'm kind of guessing a little bit here. But my general sense is the next big breakthrough in social entrepreneurship will be small and medium enterprises in the developing world that get linked on supply chains into wealthier markets in the global north. That feels to me like we're on the crest of some big breakthroughs. Terrific organizations like Root Capital and others, I don't need to make a long list, but that feels to me like there's something important happening there. The other big breakthrough, I think, is going to be working with, well, to put an academic title on it, a local capacity building. But the fact of the matter is, throughout the global south, we don't need to be sending smart Caucasian former Peace Corps workers to lead social enterprises anymore around the global south. We can find really top flight indigenous talent that speak the language of their country, understand the cultural mores, can listen more carefully to what's going on in those markets. And I think there's going to be big breakthroughs for social enterprise companies that figure out ways to be intermediaries between the funding bases in the global north and people who are progenitors of ideas in the global north, but staffing them in the global south. So those are 2 trends I see, and because the camera's on me and the lights are hot, I can't think of a 3rd one, so I'll just keep moving. Who are your enemies, in quote? Are they mostly from public government sector or, okay. Who are my enemies? Indifference. And I'm not being cute here, but you know, they say the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. I think the thing that sucks me dry the fastest is when I'm talking to people and they're indifferent. You know, the narrow, focused individual who can only empathize with people directly in front of them, who only grow when they personally experience distress of some kind in their immediate family, and who therefore carry around with them this kind of wall, this hard wall of indifference that shuts them off both to the terrific energy and beauty of so many people around the world, but but they also self-limit themselves. And to be honest, that's fine by me, because it's their life, and if they want to leave it as a crimped, desiccated, soulless person, that's fine with me, I don't care. But it's debilitating when you run into a lot of those people in a row and you're trying to move an agenda. And of course, since I talked about listenership, the predicate for finding out who they are is listening to them. So you need to be able to listen, but still keep your own vitality. And I find that the enemy that drags me down the most. It's the most immobilizing. Sometimes I have to take a day and regroup and rethink and find other ways to regenerate my energy level. The second part of this question is, do I think there's a particular institution that's more of an enemy or more of a hurdle than any other? And the answer to that is decidedly no. When I used the phrase in my remarks about being a pragmatic pluralist, what I meant by that was all institutions are also can be institutions of change. So what I think is true is the larger institutions become, the more difficult they are to move, the more ossified, the more people cover their butts, the more documentation, they're more interested in, they just become more rigid. And that applies to big corporations, big nonprofits, big government. I mean, just large institutions are tough to manage. That doesn't mean we don't need big institutions. We have big problems. We need to have big institutions to address them. And we have big populations. And this is not an argument for small is beautiful. It's just a recognition, if you're trying to change the world and make it a better place, when you engage with large institutions, it can feel like they're pretty stuck in their ways and pretty deadly. Even though within those institutions there can be terrific people who are great advocates and great champions for change, but it's the facts of our time. Okay, so by the way, if I'm answering some question that you asked and I didn't answer it the way you wanted it, I'll make up a different answer. Sir.
You have videos, interviews with social entrepreneurs who describe their successes and failures. I haven't seen them, I apologize, but no. I will. What if you were to ask them about your definition of your own failure, which you just described? What kind of, because surely they have met distributional resistance, distributional obstacles, surely that's at the very heart of their experiences, and
right.
perhaps they relationally were larger failures than yours, proportionally. What do you think they would have said to you if you took your
right.
Paradox of having these very good content videos but not knowing how to distribute? What would they have said?
Oh, that's a terrific question, and everybody kind of got the gist of it. I can answer the question because we talk about it endlessly, right? Yeah. I mean, they donated their time to be interviewed, and we had some very savvy people involved in this project. I should tell you that. This wasn't the amateur hour. So your question uncovers, by accident, I think, one of the things that we need to be careful about. I've talked to them all. They're enormously civil and uncritical. The tendency is to say something that goes like, oh, Jonathan, don't feel bad. The videos are great. You've had 100,000 people watch them. Isn't that terrific? Feel good about yourself. And one of the dynamics, one of the swirls that goes around in all of our space is that we're very courteous to each other. We want to be supportive. We want to encourage people. We don't want to rain on other people's parade. And so we have a tendency to not give the hard-edged answer that would possibly be more useful. So in practical terms, I can tell you that the social entrepreneurs who happen to be the ones we interviewed have fallen mostly in the camp of sharing with me the big hug. Okay. And depending on which of the entrepreneurs I interviewed, some of the hugs have been really quite nice. But it doesn't move the agenda. More interestingly, what I learned, but again, this is after the fact, in talking to and networking my way in a struggle to save this project to some of the leading media tycoons in the United States. And for reasons of privacy, I really can't share specifics, but think in the order of not the managing editor of the Washington Post, but the CEO, or of the New York Times, or USA Today, or NBC, whatever, or oh, you get the idea? And they basically, and I at that point was so desperate, I was saying, you can use the videos for free. We'll license them to you for just $1 a year, because we just want to get them out there at this point. And if they get attention and people like them, then we can have a conversation about how to film a second season, how we'll pay for it, and so forth. And they basically chuckled, and they were very kind and very gracious with their time. Again, some very complimentary words about the quality of the videos, which may have been just being nice to me, or they may really believe it, who knows. But in the end, what they said was, look, no one's cracked the nut how to make money with video and content on the internet. Everybody's still struggling how to monetize this particular field, so don't feel bad. This actually made me feel worse because I felt like, you know, this is something I could have learned before we wrote the first dollar. You know, look, let me just say this about being a social entrepreneur. There's no recovery from stupidity. You do just make mistakes. I made a mistake. I didn't do enough due diligence. I was listening to the wrong voices. I wanted to believe this project was needed. I was so enthused about the millennial generation and their sense of global citizenship and their commitment to a better world, and I wanted to be involved, and people said, oh yeah, videos, that's the way, YouTube and so forth. And you know, I just jumped in prematurely, and it was a rookie mistake. I just didn't make it when I was a rookie. You know, so somebody anonymously said that wisdom is knowing, or is it, I think it's wisdom is recognizing a mistake when you've made it another time. You know, and so, I mean, I've done this before. You know, I get excited and I get passionate and I get charged out there before I've done all my homework. Yeah, let's do live questions because I can't read some of this handwriting. Some of you need to go into medicine.
Hi, Jonathan. So just before I get to my question, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us today and for the other events that you've done while here in Vancouver, and to everyone who has taken the time to put this event together. It's truly a pleasure to be here. And before I ask my question, I have to make a comment about Cafe Impact. And I completely appreciate and respect your goal and that you feel that that was a failure, but I just want you to know that it was my first foray into social enterprise that was actually watching your Cafe Impact, and it's why I'm here today and why I'm exploring the field. So for me, it was very successful and impactful, so thank you.
Thank you.
So my question as an MBA candidate, and also for my fellow students that are here today, as we're getting started, what from your experience, how do you think we should pack our toolkit for social entrepreneurship?
What is your toolkit?
That's
What's
up for
in
your
it?
interpretation. That's what I want you to tell me. What do I need to put in it?
So there's no universal answer to the question, because your toolkit is not the same as his or her or whatever. But I would say there's a place for everyone. So that's the first thing to know. I think it's helpful to unpack this business of being, so let me untie my tongue and say, I'm presuming that as a newly minted MBA student, the highest probability is you're going to look for a job. You're not going to go out and start your own enterprise, either because it's not fully formed in your mind, or you don't have the ability to raise money, or you're just scared to death to do it. Okay. So if you're looking for a job, it seems to me useful to unpack the social entrepreneurship space and blow away some of the fog. So the first thing is, don't start with what your mission is or your values. We'll get there in a minute. Start with what you like to do. What's fun? So like in my case, let me tell you what's not fun. If there's a spreadsheet attached to an email, I twitch. I don't like dealing with numbers. I don't understand them. I don't, anything with charts and, oh, by the way, here's a great tip. So if you want to impress your friends, you go buy books that are really hard to read, with a lot of charts in them. You don't read them. You just buy the book, and then you put a Post-it note on it, and you send it to them and say, I thought you'd find this provocative. And they think you've read the book. It's terrific. So that's what I do when I get books that are real, or reports or annual with lots of charts on them. I've scribbled, who do I know who might be interested, and I send it off to them. It's terrific. Usually, it's also a good way to inflict pain on your enemies. So I like to do things that involve interacting with people. I like to do, these are the fun core things. We all have a list of 5 or 6 or 10 or whatever those. Start by just finding the kinds of jobs that allow you to do that. Now, this isn't because I care whether or not you're happy. I actually don't. What I care about is you doing a good job. We have plenty of people in the social change business who do a crummy job or a so-so job. If you have fun, if you enjoy the actual it of what you're doing, working with numbers or working with writing or engaging, you get the flavor of what I'm talking about, working with your hands, working with your, whatever that is, you're going to do a better job at it. You'll work longer at it, you'll work harder at it, a larger percentage of your week. You won't be thinking about what's my work-life balance, because your life will feel more integrated because you're doing the work that's fun for you. And then you'll do a better job. So that's point 1. Point 2 is think in terms of a role definition for yourself within an organization that's using the tools that you want to use, and make that your second criteria. So it's not about, I want to save the environment. It's about, I want to be the chief operating officer, or I want to be the graphic designer, or I want to be the bookkeeper, or I want to be the whatever, okay? Because people don't hire people for the mission. They hire people to get something functionally done. It's a utilitarian transactional relationship. So if you're going to go out and talk to people about what you want to be in the social change space, look around and see what the jobs are titled that have the stuff that's fun for you to do, and start telling people that's what you want to be. And the third step, which from my heart to yours, is non-negotiable, but it's sequentially number 3, do it where it's aligned with your mission. But you can't do that if the first 2 hurdles aren't overcome as you look for your career choice. And in a tough job market, I have found myself a number of times advising people in one-on-one sessions where they've gotten kind of frustrated and the rent money's getting a little thin and it's tough. Okay, go take a job that meet categories 1 and 2 and perfect your skills. Increase your market value, and do a little volunteer work on the side in your values-aligned work, and come back in 6 months or a year. But don't sit still. Every job is suboptimal. As everybody who works with me will tell you, they love the work, they have terrific fun, they like their job title, all of that stuff, and they certainly love the values of the work. But working with me is not so good. So every job is suboptimal, and I'm a living proof of it. So, okay. I hope that was helpful. Did that sort of? Definitely. All right. Can I say one other thing about that? Every time you go to a job interview, or you're talking with someone who's more powerful with you than you are, which is what a job interview is, or you're in a group of people who seem to have their act together, just remember your authentic story, you're the only expert on that. Be who you are. And I'm not saying that because of some sort of, transcendental, ephemeral, ethereal kind of advice. It's the most convincing thing you bring to the job. It is the number one thing in everybody's toolkit, and it's uniquely yours. Oscar Wilde said, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. So don't try and outthink or pretend you are what you're not. And it's a much more convincing sell. And if you are who I like to think and believe each of you is, your passion and your values and your commitment and your authenticity will come out. And I particularly am addressing those remarks to those of you who've had some wacky or a zigzag career path that you think maybe, those 2 years when you were, sailing around the world maybe doesn't align, or you come from maybe a more humble background, or there's something in your background that you feel is, a little bit of an anchor. It's not. It's what makes you unique, and it's what makes you special. And more to the point, if the people who are about to hire you don't see you for that, they don't get the whole you, screw them. Don't take the job. Because you're not going to be happy, and the job won't be fun. You won't do a good job. And in the end, they'll be unhappy with you, and you won't get that terrific reference for the next job. So this is not just, nothing I'm telling you or sharing with you of my views on this is meant to stay in the clouds. This is what I really experience when I work with my colleagues and and other social entrepreneurs. The winning ticket's authenticity. Yes, ma'am, sorry.
So you mentioned that listening is the industrial spy of social change. But from my experience, people often tell you what they think you want to hear rather than the truth. So how do you listen so you can get the truth in people?
It's a terrific question. And there's a video on this, by the way. It's called How to Be a Selfish Listener to Change the World or something like that. Anyway, just when you get to the website, you can just put in the word selfish and you'll get there, I think. But that's the answer. You need to be an interrogator, a prosecutor. You need to be genuinely curious. And the trick is ask a gazillion questions. I don't play poker, but everybody knows what a poker tell is, I think. It's, somebody signals after a while, you get to know them well enough. It's not a quick conversation. Sometimes it takes some drilling down. But stick with it. And people will eventually start, it's amazing what people will tell you. You're talking to a funder, they'll tell you. If you ask, do they want to be followed up by getting a lot of paper? Or do they want a quick email? Do they want a YouTube video? So instead of inundating them, just leaving the room and not knowing, instead of inundating them with 1,000 things that just make them annoyed that, with you, ask, how would you like me to follow up? If you're talking to somebody and their eyes glaze over, and I'm not sure the context you were asking the question, but their eyes glaze over and they're clearly not listening to you, there's 100 reasons, and it may have nothing to do with you or your pitch or your question. They may have just found out their dog died, or maybe they've got hemorrhoids. They're not listening to you unless you've got the cure for hemorrhoids, right? So ask them, what would you like to talk about? It's amazing. The funny thing about this is, if you really do take an interest in the other person and you're asking them lots of questions about it, it's shocking to me how easy it is to trick people into thinking you're charming. And then they take an interest in you and they start asking you questions. And that's the beginning of an authentic look for that, how can we work together conversation, which is why you're probably talking to them. Okay, are we out of time?
We are out of time.
Oh,
and
yes.
I just want to thank you. I want to be a selfish listener as I was. And I want to thank you for really an inspirational and practical and moving talk. And I really appreciate it. And so please join me in thanking Jonathan Lewis.
Thank you. Thank you.